Hey everybody, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Beekeeping for Newbies. Today is going to be Bees in the News, episode 21. We got a couple interesting articles coming your way, and I apologize, man. I really wanted to get this out several hours ago, but I've got a bit of a situation going on right now that unfortunately, I think it's going to end up becoming a legal matter, so I can't really go into too much detail, but I will say that one of my daughters is renting a place near a major university where she's going to school. And these rental manager guys, a lot of them, they think that it's a combination of things. I think one of them is that they're renting to girls, so they think that girls are not smart enough to figure out the difference between like a roof leaking and the sound of something else. Like, we only hear this sound when it's raining and it's dripping onto the ceiling. Anyway, so they think that girls aren't smart enough to figure it out. So the guy said something like, "Oh, it's just the vent pipe making some noise." "Oh, really?" "Yeah, and we only hear the vent pipe making that noise when it's raining." Anyway, so it turns out to be this big leak, been going on for like 2 months, and I've been dealing with that today. So I'm literally handing it over to my attorney right now, and I'm out. I'm not going to deal with that crap anymore. So we'll keep you updated on the fun saga of what's going on with that. Now, this first article we have today, it's coming to us out of Texas. And this is one of those, like, when I'm looking for interesting articles that have gone down over the past week, this one was like the top 15 articles. The same people are reporting the same story over and over. So you've probably already heard of it, but I'm going to share it with you anyway, because there is an important note that I wanted to make. So the title says, "His face had blood all over it. North Texans hospitalized in bee swarm attack." So let's stay with that. Bee swarm attack. 2 people were transported to a local hospital after reports of a bee swarm attack in North Richland Hills Tuesday. North Richland Hills police and fire responded to the 8,000 block of Cross Drive around 12:09 p.m. after receiving reports of 2 people, a man and a woman, who were being swarmed by bees, according to police. Quote, "I saw some bees, a lot of bees, low to the ground, and then I looked down and I saw an elderly man on the floor on his side. His face had blood all over it," said a neighbor who didn't want to be identified. She said she watched from her car as the man's wife and a neighbor both tried to help but were forced back inside. She called 911 and soon said police and firefighters were fighting off bees to save him. "You could just see he was not in good shape. He was in despair. His hand kept moving and then it wouldn't move again," she said. With the help of local beekeepers, the NRH Fire Department transported the man and woman to a local hospital. The man is listed in critical condition, according to police. Now here's where it gets interesting. Police said the beekeepers worked to contain multiple hives and wasp nests while residents were asked to avoid the area. Now, that's interesting to me because, as all of us know, if you've been listening to the podcast for maybe more than 2 or 3 weeks, and maybe you're a member of our Discord room or somewhere you have some information in the past about bees, well, we know that honeybees don't do anything with wasp nests. So are we talking about Africanized bees, or are we talking about wasps? Like, what's going on here? So the next quote, "We had to cut the tree open in order to get the bees out," said Eric Etheridge. Okay, so again, is it wasps or is it honeybees? Now, we know that swarming bees, and this is where I think it gets interesting, because I think the media quite often generically says when we see a group of bees, they are swarming. And so all of us who are beekeepers, we immediately get on edge and we're like, no. Swarming is not a bunch of bees moving together at the same time. Swarming is a process of reproduction where a bunch of bees move to a location, stay there while they're scouting for a new location, and then move to new locations. Sometimes they do that a couple of times until they get where they want to go. But again, media folks often say, well, there were like 100 bees or so together in one place, so that's a swarm. So it sounds like it's really more of a disconnect in defining what a swarm actually is. But again, going to wasps, is it a wasp issue or is it honeybees? If it's honeybees, you got to think in Texas, they're probably Africanized. But if it's not, obviously, wasps are kind of a different thing altogether. And this is where honeybees get a bad rap a lot. It's kind of frustrating. Anyway, so Etheridge owns Sweet Mon Chéri. He and his team spent hours vacuuming out the bees and transporting them to boxes. So that tells me right there, you have some kind of honeybee, whether it's Africanized or not. It's probably about 3 to 4 feet high with about 5 to 7 honeycomb frames, he said. Etheridge said the bees were typical honeybees, not the more aggressive Africanized bees. He said they likely went on the offensive to protect their hive as the homeowner did yard work nearby. We just want him to be okay, praying for his quick recovery, said the man's neighbor. So again, I'm like, you're in Texas. You're in Texas. We know there's Africanized bees. Honeybees, like regular old honeybees, don't tend to attack in that manner. Like, again, I wasn't there. I got to trust that this guy has it together. But anyway, big article. A lot of people are talking about it. So I wanted to share that one with you. Again, that one's out of Texas. So this is an article that is actually a little bit older, but somebody linked to it yesterday or the day before. It's coming from the Cornell University website here. Bee antidote to deadly pesticides shows promise. And this article is about 2 weeks old. Scientists may have found an antidote to pesticides that are directly and indirectly killing bees, according to a new paper published September 5th in Nature Sustainability, showing promising early results in common eastern bumblebees. The findings are critically important as bees provide essential pollination services for close to 80% of the world's crops, but annual losses of managed U.S. honeybee hives averaged up to 44% between 2017 and 2020. Dozens of studies have documented regional and global declines of wild bees, according to the paper. The proof-of-concept study in bumblebees describes the use of tiny ingestible hydrogel microparticles, 5 microns in diameter and only visible under a microscope, that physically bind to neonicotinoids, a class of pesticides banned in Europe and still in limited use in the U.S. Once absorbed, the pesticides and microparticles pass through the bee's digestive tract and are excreted. The study found that when the microparticles were fed to bumblebees in sugar water, they led to 30% higher survival rates in bumblebees exposed to lethal doses of neonicotinoids and significantly lessened symptoms in bumblebees exposed to sublethal doses of the chemical. The antidote has the potential to be selectively applied to other pesticides, including widely used organophosphates. So anyway, there's more to the article as always, but I will include this one for your viewing and reading pleasure. Okay, and the next article is coming to us out of Maine. Decades-old colony of 40,000 bees removed from inside walls of family's home. Westbrook, Maine, a farmhouse in Maine, is getting a buzzworthy renovation. It's because of what had to be taken out of the house before the work could even get started. A hive that housed over 40,000 bees had been inside the walls of an old farmhouse in Westbrook for decades. The family, who said the bees could have been in the walls for up to 80 years, wanted to safely relocate the colony instead of killing the insects. So the family called in a bee expert to move them from the walls to a hive outside of the building. In the meantime, they plan to maintain the hive. The family's hope is that the colony can survive the winter so it can be relocated somewhere else on the farm. The family has a long relationship with the bees, and they felt strongly about saving them. The bee expert said the bees have medicinal value and they pollinate their crops. So here's the thing. This is another one that like a ton of people covered the story, and it's neat and it's cool, and it's always, one of those heartwarming stories to be like, oh, wow, isn't that cool? But I mean, the reality of it is it's very normal for a colony of bees to occupy an area and then they move on to somewhere else. And then it's vacant for a little while. And then another colony of bees is scouting for a new home. And they go, hey, look, there's a place that's already kind of like what we're used to. And then they go and they occupy the place. I mean, it says here again, was it the family who said the bees could have been in the walls for up to 80 years? Maybe I'm just too skeptical. I don't know. It just seems really improbable to me, especially with Varroa and all the other things going on, to think that this one bloodline, one family group of bees that just new queen every 3 or 4 years and they just keep going and there's no problems. Like I said, cute story, but I kind of question that whole 80-year thing. But anyway, next article is coming to us from Environment America. Signs of hope, new bee species discovered across the country. The discovery of new wild bee species is a beacon of hope as bees continue to face threats from pesticides and habitat loss. Here's a bright spot for the bees. New species are still being discovered today in states across the country. In fact, I think if you remember from last week, we talked about a few new bees that were recently found. I think it was in Montana. So that's definitely consistent with what we've been hearing. A researcher spent his days combing through a rich meadow, buzzing with life, cataloging bees as he goes. What a cool job that must be. Like you wake up and like, what are you going to do today? I'm going to go out and hang out in the field for a little while, watch the bees come and go, see if I see anything new. It's not a bad gig. Anyway, among the common bumblebees, he spots a bee smaller than an apple seed, tiny with darker features. The scientist is delighted and curious about this new mystery bee standing out against a bright yellow flower. It could be the first sighting of a whole new species. Discoveries like this one are happening more often than you might think, but if we don't act soon to save the bees, new wild bee species will disappear before we ever meet them. New bee discoveries add to the amazing diversity of wild bee species. There are thousands of unique species of bees, from the metallic sweat bee to the fuzzy bumblebee to the tunneling mason bee, and those are just the bees we already know about. Recent years have unveiled dozens of wild bee species that were previously unknown. In 2023, researchers identified 3 new species of bees in California and Arizona with luminescent bodies. Discoveries like this add to our knowledge of the range and movement of bee species. Bee surveyors are finding wild bees never seen before in their states. Volunteers with a Bee Atlas project in Oregon found a species of wild bee new to Oregon, but also not seen anywhere in 40 years. A research project in Iowa found 7 new species of bees in 2022. Surveys in Pennsylvania and Vermont have also documented bees not previously known to call those states home. Even in the face of disappearing pollinator habitat and the widespread use of toxic bee-killing pesticides, bees are still hanging on and finding ways to survive. It's a beacon of hope. But that hope needs to spur action quickly. So there's a bit more to it, as always here, but kind of a cool thing. I think that there is a lot of information out there that you constantly get bombarded with, like the save the bees. And you got to remember the big difference between your native pollinators and your managed bees. Because let's say I'm a beekeeper and I have 100 hives, and let's say I'm having 50% losses every year. So I have 100 colonies. In the spring, I split them, I have 200. I overwinter, I lose 50%, and I start the next year with 100. Okay, now that's obviously assuming that I'm not doing any other type of management. I'm just multiplying, losing half, and just lather, rinse, repeat every year. Well, that's fine, but that's managed. Those are managed bees. I'm taking them to places to pollinate. I am moving them. Now, you don't have to be, but again, in the example I'm using, I'm small time commercial beekeeper, and I'm taking 100 colonies out to pollinate, and I'm moving them around. I'm putting them on whatever might be, in bloom, whatever the flow is for that area at that time. I'm moving them around for business purposes. And then at the end of the year, I do what I got to do to get them ready for winter. Over winter, I lose 50%. But remember that when I first got to my place, I'll use my property as an example, my apiary property. So I go there, I have nothing there. I bring 200 colonies in. Well, there weren't 200 colonies of bees there before, and there are now. And then I move them around as we're doing pollination, and I bring them back. And then I lose 100%. Oh no, everything's going to fall apart. Well, no, because they weren't already there. There are native pollinators that are surviving in the wild without me. There are honeybees, while they're not as many as there used to be, but there are wild honeybees that are varroa resistant and are disease resistant, and they are surviving on their own in the wild. So I think that while there is a lot of issue and there are a lot of challenges and problems with managed honeybees, as a career, as a hobby, yeah, losses are high. But I think the focus, in my opinion, really ought to be on what can we do to support, lift up, and care for all of the native pollinators that are not under direct management. What can we do to have a better quality of life for them? That's kind of my mindset. I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but that's what goes through my mind. But kind of a cool little picture of this bee. If you get a chance to check out the article, all the articles are going to be linked on the Beekeeping for Newbies homepage under the In the News section, episode 21. He's a cool looking little fella. Okay, last one is not a serious bee thing, but again, with everybody and their brother reporting on the barn bees and the people who were attacked by the swarm of killer wasp honeybee non-Africanized in Texas, there wasn't a lot to choose from this week. The Salt Lake Bees played their final game at Smith's Ballpark on September 23rd. The Salt Lake Tribune reports the stadium was the team's home for 3 decades, and the site hosted baseball games for almost a century. Over 13,000 fans filled the ballpark for the final game. The Bees were defeated 3-1 by the Oklahoma City Baseball Club. Next season, the team will play at a new stadium in West Jordan. So apparently they're moving from the city to a suburb. You'll still get to see the Bees in Utah and Salt Lake City. You're just not going to get to see them where you used to. Well, folks, that is about all that I've got. I do have a lot of updates coming up. I'm probably going to just pack them into a Bee Buzz because I've got some fall notes and a lot of things I've been writing down, and I want to get out to everybody sooner than later. So I'll probably get that released in the next week or two. We still got to catch up with Etienne out there in the Yukon. I know he's probably getting ready to start getting his bees ready for winter, but I know he was on a bit of a trip last time we spoke. and I do need to get back in touch with him. But we'll get that interview knocked out here probably in the next month or so. But outside of that, that's all I've got for you today, folks. So take care, be kind to one another, and remember that I love you, and there's nothing you can do about it. We'll talk to you soon.